Hello guys, this is MTandi, and welcome to my mob grinder building guide. I will cover all details about how to build successful hostile mob grinder of any type. In the first part, I'll talk about spawning and consider best conditions for our future grinder. In the second part, I will compare different grinder designs and identify all their pros and cons. I will refrain from diving into equations and spawning algorithms, so we'll refresh in our memory only basics which are part of a common sense for Minecraft players. Grinders are divided in two big groups: the monster spawner based grinders and grinders that use natural spawners. There are plenty of tutorials about how to build monster spawner grinders, and it doesn't require any advanced knowledge, so we will be talking only about grinders that use natural spawning. We will assume that the natural spawner is a hollow box made of solid blocks with dark space inside and leave the designs for a second part. I had few comments like, why would I need grinder, what is the point in all this? So mob grinder is a great structure that can provide you with a very diverse ration of meat and vegetables in unlimited quantities. You will collect bones which can be turned into a bone meal and used to make even more food or later tame wolves. You can find bows, swords and different equipment with infinite amount of arrows to shoot with those bows. Iron ingots will let you repair or create even more equipment. Gunpowder is the main ingredient for throwable potions and stuff that makes loud noises. You can purify zombies to make your own village, and by collecting string you can make wool, which is a good building block, or you can sell it to villagers and basically make money out of air. Creepers will deliver the latest album of your favorite group, and if you have enough guts you can turn the mobs into the minions to do dirty job for you. If you build grinders in other dimensions, they will provide even more power and money, and not to mention that you will collect experience to enchant your gear. So if you have grinder, you can actually colonize Mars or survive a nuclear winter. As you know, mobs spawn around player, and each player has a mob activity zone. If the block is dark enough and situated at least 24 meters away from the player, and not farther than 128 meters, it's considered as a spawning block. Spawned mobs' behavior varies depending on the distance to the player. Within 32-meter radius, they will walk randomly around and never despawn, but if the mob is more than 32 meters away, it can eventually enter the idle state and despawn. The farther the mob, the more likely this to happen. That is why we have to keep our spawning area in the green ring that represents the mob activity zone to have the best rates. But mobs can't spawn infinitely because of the global mob cap that determines the maximum amount of mobs per dimension, depending on the loaded chunks. That is the main flaw of Minecraft spawning system and the reason why grinders doesn't work in multiplayer as well as in the single player worlds. Because the mob cap is bounded to the dimension instead of the player, other players can fill mob cap and you will have reduced rates or even no mob spawning around you at all. So the only way in this situation is to leave grinder working in the morning when the amount of players online is minimal. To make sure that your efforts will not be in vain, check if mobs can spawn on the server you play. Walk on the surface at night or go caving. If you see mobs, then you can start building the grinder. If mobs can be found, then check the difficulty. Mobs doesn't spawn on peaceful, so if your hunger bar is not depleting, then mobs won't spawn at all. Sometimes mob spawning is disabled in the server configuration. If that's the case, your only option is to build grinders somewhere else. If the difficulty is not peaceful, mob spawning is enabled and there are still no mobs even after the server reboot, which is unlikely. That means that someone special disabled the mob spawning artificially using certain spawn chunks. Hurry up and break that infernal machine. If mobs still don't spawn, then go drink a cup of tea. In single player worlds, the spawning rate will always be full, but in multiplayer it depends on other players' locations. If you are alone on the server, then it's no different from single player, but if there are other players online, one of two conditions must be met to have full spawning rates. They must be in other dimensions. For example, if you build an Enderman farm, then it doesn't matter how much players are currently in overworld, because they won't affect the mob cap in end dimension. The full spawning rates can still be achieved if players are in your dimension but doesn't have any spawn blocks near them, or they all came to see you cutting the red tripwire of your newly built grinder and are close to you. Your mob activity zones are matching and mobs spawn normally. Otherwise, prepare to have reduced rates or no mob spawning at all. Choosing the altitude is a crucial part. As you know, each chunk has LC value. LC value represents Y coordinate of the lowest sub-chunk, made only of air blocks with zero light level. The bigger the LC value, the less the chance the mob will spawn inside your grinder during the spawning iteration. If you place the mob grinder up in the sky, the spawning rates will be reduced because of the high LC value of the chunks. To compensate this, you must extend the spawning area of your grinder. On the other hand, you won't have to light up the caves and surface because it will be out of the mob spawning range. You won't have to dig up the hole in the ground, so it is possible to have complete grinder working on full efficiency within 1 hour after you join the server. Transportation problem can be solved using the nether portals to travel between the grinder and the surface. The low altitude grinder can spawn mobs faster even without the extended spawning area because of the low LC value. But mob cap will be filled by the mobs in the surrounding caves and surface, so it may work even worse than the high altitude grinder unless you light up all the caves and surface in 128 meter radius around the grinder, which requires a lot of the time and patience. Ocean biome is the perfect place for the grinders. You can place your high altitude grinder a bit lower because mobs can spawn in the sea, and a huge body of water pushes the cave layer further down and will save your life if you fall from the grinder. For low altitude grinder, you will have to light up less caves and forget about lighting up the surface. Horizontal position is all about chunks. If you use low altitude grinder, make sure that slimes can't spawn in the chunks. They can be very annoying. Fit your grinder in the smallest possible amount of chunks so mobs will spawn evenly on all paths. If the grinder relies on redstone during the process, it can cause twice more lags if you place it in the wrong way, because it will update to 8 chunks instead of 4. So that is all you need to know about external conditions. In the description you can find download link for this example of how you should place the low altitude grinder. Thanks for watching and see you in the second part.